Portland, Oregon. It's time for A Different View, with women's perspectives on the fight to end prohibition again, with Portland Dispensaries examiner and mother of four, Jennifer Alexander, and professional healthcare provider Iva Cunningham from Alternative Medical Choices, Inc. Now, here's A Different View.
Welcome to A Different View. I'm Jennifer. We have Iva remotely. Iva, are you here?
I sure am. How's everybody in the big city of Portland?
Oh, we're doing good here. And you're in Florida, coming home tomorrow. So this is the last week we'll have you remotely like this right now, right?
That's correct. I'll be home tomorrow evening about 8:30. And you know what I can't wait to do?
I could guess smoke a joint or a bowl.
Big giant, you know what, fatty. That's what it would be. It would be a fatty.
I bet. Well, come on by when you get home.
I will, Jen.
So tonight's show, we're going to talk about kind of the different things happening nationwide with legalization. We've got the Indiana State Police Chief talking about it. We're going to talk about children and medical marijuana here in Oregon. Going to talk a little bit about Adderall. There's a new blog from the Drug Free America Foundation that I found it shocking and appalling, and we'll talk about that some more in the third segment. And then in our final segment today, we'll talk a little bit about what Oregon's going to be doing moving forward. There's a lot going on here, and I think there's a lot of interesting things to talk about.
A lot of controversy around what Oregon should do and what Oregon shouldn't do. I think that should make for an interesting conversation.
Well, and ironically, it's a lot of controversy with a lot of agreement too, a surprising amount of agreement from what we've had in the past, and I think that I'm very happy to see kind of the direction that we're going.
Agreement? Do you mean agreement as far as in the activist community, or is that what you're referring to?
Well, that and like with the Oregonian editorial board, I mean, there's a lot of things that we're hearing, statewide that shows that we're all kind of on the same page. We're just working out the details now, I think.
Do you think that's because people see people going over the border to Vancouver, the big city going right across the bridge to get there?
I think that's at least one argument. I think there's a lot of different things, and we'll talk about that in the fourth segment when we get there, because there's a lot to talk about. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. You're listening to A Different View.
I'd follow my nose down to Washington Square, look for a Rasta or a hippie with long hair. They'd sell them.
The law offices of Omar Figueroa would like to remind you to stand up for your rights. Please do not give up your precious liberties. There's nothing wrong with standing up for our constitutional rights, and in fact, it's the only way to honor the Constitution that recognizes our natural rights. Treat law enforcement with respect and respect the Constitution by standing up for your rights. If you are detained or arrested, stand up for your rights by repeating, "I respectfully invoke all my legal and constitutional rights. I do not consent to any search and seizure. I want to remain silent, and I want to speak to my attorney, Omar Figueroa." Omar Figueroa has more than a decade of experience in federal and California courts and graduated from Yale University, Stanford Law School, and Trial Lawyers College. Please contact the law offices of Omar Figueroa at 415-489-0420 or 707-829-0215, or on the web at www.omarfigueroa.com.
Αφού σας είναι πια γνωστό, όταν συμβεί στα Πέριξ, φωτιές να καίνε.
And now we're back with A Different View.
Welcome back. I'm Jennifer, here with Iva. Well, not here with, but here with. She's in Florida. Iva, you still here?
Oh, gotta unmute.
Okay, now we got Iva. Wow, maybe she's not here now. Well, we were going to talk in this segment a little bit about the Indiana State Police Chief. There was an article that came out, looks like today.
She's back.
Iva?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, good. So we're going to talk a little bit about this article with this Indiana State Police Chief. He's calling for legalization and taxing pot in Indiana, of all places, which is where I'm from. And
I think the pressure's on, don't you?
absolutely. He says, according to the article, it's here, it's going to stay. There's an awful lot of victimization that goes with it. If it were up to me, I do believe I would legalize it and tax it, particularly in sight of the fact that several other states have now come to that part of their legal system as well. And he basically calls for, a legal market for selling and growing and all of these things. And then basically that the only time that law enforcement should be involved at all is when people aren't complying with those laws, which
Right.
Again kind of goes hand in hand with what we're trying to see, a valid, lawful market. Now, I personally, I'd kind of like to see civil penalties for failing to fall in, as the ideal end goal here, as opposed to a SWAT raid if you didn't have the proper license. But but I think that we're all heading the same way here, and that's it's amazing to see so much happening in Indiana. I think we had talked about it in the past, but if not, there's at least one senator in Indiana that's been working on these issues in the last few years, since 2010 at least, and she put a bill through a couple of years ago to Indiana. Not having the Citizens Initiative does things kind of a little differently than out on the West Coast here. And so she put a bill through that called on the legislature to basically form a commission to investigate marijuana, like in terms of, decriminalization, legalization, medical marijuana. And then they all got together and talked about it. The bill passed, so they did talk about it. And it sounds like those discussions actually had gone pretty well, because she's coming back now to introduce these bills, as this article points out, one for decriminalizing marijuana in small amounts, personal possession, and one for medical marijuana. So, there's a lot going on out there.
Well, that's for sure. I think, when we said this before the election, we only needed one state to legalize to put pressure on everybody else. I'm still waiting to see what the federal government's going to do, but I think there's a lot of states that are going, you know what, it is time to re-examine our state's laws on prohibition. It's time to, get on board with the rest of the nation. And actually, the general consensus of the nation is to legalize, is to regulate.
Yeah. The one thing that I've been noticing more and more and more as these conversations have been evolving is that I think there's clearly a consensus throughout the majority of Americans that the policy does need to change. And then it's in these varying shades of how we're changing it that we all seem to, have differences of opinions. So the more we're having this conversation, the more evolved it's becoming, because I think even people at the extremes find that sort of happy middle point.
I think what people are learning is the problems with prohibition. We have been attacking the problems and educating more and more people about the problems with prohibition. I think as parents, we don't want to see our kids have access to it. What I also think is that as parents, we also don't want to see our kids' lives turned upside down and ruined, their futures ruined for consuming or using cannabis. We're not saying condone that, but we don't want to see our kids having to suffer the consequences of youthful indiscretions.
Right. Well, and for me personally, that's where I see it happening the most. The younger people think it's no big deal. Society thinks it's no big deal. And then they get busted, and it does become a big deal. They have to deal with those lifelong consequences that follow them.
And they really are lifelong consequences. They won't get student loans. They'll have problems that follow them in their employment opportunities, sometimes in housing. Career choices are limited. And if they can look at your Facebook and disagree with something that you said there, this is even more serious. So I think that a lot of people are seeing a lot of wasted resources on going after people when, for minor drug possession or even, even or just marijuana in general, when there are so many other crimes that are going unsolved, murder, rape, molestation, those kinds of things that they're in most people's books are far more important and more egregious and need more attention than they're getting.
Right, definitely. And I think as our budget,
and that's something that we're hearing from law enforcement. I mean, this is from law enforcement. This article is written, this comes from the law enforcement's perspective, and I think more and more law enforcement is seeing the ridiculousness of chasing down, potheads for a little bit of reefer. When their dockets are overflowing with more serious crime that they're not having the chance to get to.
Right. And I was going to say, I think that it was okay to humor a certain population previously. When we had a budget surplus and everything, we could afford to spend a little bit of money on what were believed to be, potentially unsolvable moral dilemmas. Should people smoke pot? Well, no, they shouldn't smoke pot. Okay, well, we'll lock them all up. I was actually watching an old documentary the other day, but it gave that clip from George Bush Sr. where it said, some people say there won't be enough room in our prisons for all the, drug addicts. We'll make room, and that was the mindset when this all started is it doesn't matter that there's so many. We'll make room. We're going to stomp this evil out. And what we found is that not only is it not working, but we don't have the room.
I think it's much broader than that. I think that the problem is that people are recognizing that we can't legislate morality. We can't fill up our prisons because we take a moral offense. We don't have the resources. We don't have the space. There's all kinds of unintended consequences as a result of trying to legislate morality. And quite frankly, I think people that are even the most conservative people are starting to realize that I don't want you to legislate my morality.
I think that's some of it, but I think even that discussion isn't being had on as broad of scale as it should be, because we're seeing simultaneous to marijuana perspectives changing and social outlook on the issue changing. Other laws tightening down on moral issues.
I think that is a shift in people's not moral compass necessarily, but shifted in importance of the issue is that the fact that gay rights is becoming more favorable, and I think this is along that same line, is that people are realizing that our government it is too big, it's become too far reaching, it has reached into our personal lives, and where do you draw the line? Where do you stop?
Right.
We have a weird feedback.
I was going to say, wow, that kind of echoed like a bird.
All right, we have some sort of echo coming over from your Skype line, Iva, so I'm not sure how to fix that at this point, but I'll keep working on it.
Wow. I wonder if you need to turn your sound off. Do you have sound coming through speakers?
Yes, I think that might be the issue. If you have a headset, Iva, or something you can do like that to kill the speaker sound, that's going to be what will cure that.
I don't know if you can hear me at all.
We can hear you now, yeah. I think we should probably take a quick break, and we'll sort out the echo, and then we'll come back, and we're going to talk a little bit about minors in the Oregon medical marijuana program, a recent story in the Oregonian highlighting that. You're listening to A Different View.
I'm Sub Cool from Team Green Avenger. At TGAgenetics.com, we are working on the leading edge of medical strains. Our strains are rigorously tested for THC, CBD, THCV, and other critical cannabinoids. Know your grow. Check out our genetic diversity at TGAgenetics.com, the home of Jelly Bean, Jack the Ripper, Vortex, and other award-winning cannabis strains.
And now we're back with A Different View.
This is A Different View. I'm Jennifer here with Iva. Iva, you still here? Maybe we don't have Iva. Well, we're still working on it. But in the meantime, we're going to talk a little bit about the Oregonian article that was written just yesterday. Well, written before that, but published yesterday. It's called Medical Marijuana for a Child with Leukemia, and it highlights one of the local children in Oregon that's in the medical marijuana program. Her name is Michaela Comstock. She is known as Brave Michaela, and that's because she's a 7-year-old with leukemia, who quite bravely has been fighting it for the last 8 months or so, and doing quite well. And she uses medical marijuana as a part of her medicine. And this issue came up last year in the legislature and is likely to resurface again this year. And hey, there you are. This year, we expect to see this again. We're already seeing some legislative concepts coming out with the mentions of the things that we opposed last year, which included, requiring that minors in the program see their doctor 4 times a year instead of the one that, other medical marijuana patients are required, or that they see very specific types of doctors. Last year, or last legislative session where this was issued or dealt with, they suggested that it had to be a pediatrician that made the recommendation, prohibiting, all other doctors. And the interesting thing about this topic itself, before we really get too much into the article, is that there's a lot of valid presumptions made that just illustrate that the people talking about them don't understand the dynamics of the community at large, like what we're dealing with. Because, for instance, requiring that a pediatrician make the recommendation, well, if you're dealing with cancer, you're
dealing with an oncologist, not a pediatrician.
Exactly. And given the choice between an oncologist for adults or a pediatrician that doesn't know anything about cancer, you're going to go to an oncologist. The oncologist is best suited to deal with.
Pediatrician oncologist.
A pediatric oncologist would be ideal, but you don't always necessarily have access to, you know what I'm saying? Like, maybe there isn't that particular specialist in your area. You might not be dealing with a pediatric oncologist, but at the very best, that is what you're dealing with, not a straight up pediatrician.
Well, I think that this really speaks to the fear that there's a whole bunch of minors in the program and that we're just handing out pot to minors, and that's simply not the case.
Well, and that's only a fear thrown about by legislators and a couple of law enforcement officials that are opposed to medical marijuana, because I've actually mentioned that when people are like, why are we talking about these, this poor little girl's medical history in the public eye like this? Like, why do we care? A lot of the public is kind of confused on why this story even ran. And the reality is that most of the public is not at all concerned that there's some mom and doctor conspiring to use some kid to get pot and feeding it to the they don't even envision that as the likelihood. And we're talking currently, according to Noelle Crombie, who wrote the story, her contact with the OMMP office states that there are 52 children in the program. 52 children out of over 50,000 patients are under the age of 18. And I actually did get a chance to talk to Noelle about those more specific data numbers. And the number that's under 16 is minimal. There's I think only like 16 or something. Most of them are in that range of 16 to 18. It's not these little tiny kids. Now, don't get me wrong. If they were just running around smoking pot, I could see that being a concern.
Well, and I can tell you from my perspective, when at my clinic, when parents come in with their children, I first sit them down, and have a long conversation with them. I want to see how educated the parents are so they understand what they're getting themselves into. There's a different process when it comes to a minor that has to be taken into consideration. There's more paperwork. Not much more, but there is more paperwork. I also want to make sure they have a good relationship with the physician that is monitoring the child. I've seen some pretty remarkable things when it comes to the very few minors that we've had. I've seen some, like you said, 17 to 18-year-olds, 16 to 18 come in, and I've actually told the parents, look, he's not ready to handle responsibility, and I don't know that you have good control or understanding of this responsibility. And actually, I know I get vilified for this, but I don't want to create more problems for that parent. I don't want to create more problems for that child. So I've actually, encouraged the parents to wait until the child was a little bit older. I know that,
but that illustrates the actual the problem, and the problem is that most clinics and doctors are not willing to risk their integrity or their licensure to even give it to some children who may need it, but maybe that they're not in a position where politically it would work well for them, and the reality is that these people aren't even getting, the level of care that, like, say, an adult would in those situations, because it's not an option for them because of the political motivation behind it. And the reality is that we don't need more pressure on doctors preventing them from helping kids. Like they're with only 52 children, there's very few that are willing to put their neck on the line for it as it is.
Well, here's what I do find. I do find that the pediatrician or the primary physician is not willing to sign the paperwork for the child. However, they are willing to continue to treat the child
and work with that as a part of their
work with that as an alternative to their regular treatment. I don't find that. What I was going to say is I do find that parents are a lot more involved in that decision, which, more often than not, that's the case than the parent that just doesn't care, or doesn't have good control. There's only really been maybe two people that I said, maybe your child isn't quite ready and maybe you're not quite ready to handle that responsibility. And
I think you're talking about jumping into a huge political Pandora's box. I mean, it isn't just because it's marijuana, this potentially dangerous drug. It's that there's this whole lifestyle shift that accompanies that, and people don't realize how big that shift really is. It's
and I think I also have horror stories that I can't share, obviously,
right,
of kids that have suffered negative consequences of being a patient in the program because they have let other people know that they're in the program and that they have access to medical cannabis. And I think, those have been fairly unfortunate, but, they are on the severe end of the scale. There's fewer patients that have to deal with. I like to see a parent that's involved. I like to see a parent that's having a conversation. And I like to see a parent that has already put into place protocols that properly monitor the dose and monitor the child's progress, and then have it, like I said, a relationship with the child's primary care physician or pediatrician, depending on how old they are.
Right.
But that's my clinic. I cannot speak to other clinics. But again, we're not talking about a large population of people. And I can tell you from personal experience that more often than not, when a patient comes in and the patient with the parent, the parent goes, "Thank God you were willing to do that because my child has seen, X improvement." Not always, and that's the other thing too. This is the panacea. It's not going to work for everybody. But, for a lot of people, it is pretty powerful. And for some people, it is the last option. They've tried everything else. And, who wouldn't go to the end of the earth for their child?
Right. Well, and that kind of wraps us back around to Michaela's story. So in the Oregonian, I have to say that I really appreciate the effort that Noelle puts into trying to highlight the conflicts in our community, because the stories that she does illustrates that she's listening to us. However, her perspective is clearly outside of the community because she doesn't understand, or if she does, maybe it's intentional. I mean, I wouldn't pretend to presume her intentions, but based on what I've encountered with her, I have to say that it's clear to me how different everything looks from outside using medical marijuana, as though, and so this story highlights, again, Michaela, 7-year-old little girl diagnosed with leukemia. I think it was in March of last year. It was within the last year. And both of her mom and her mom's boyfriend, who takes care of Michaela and has, as long as they can remember, are cannabis users. So this immediately kind of paints this picture of, okay, these are druggies who are just now giving their kid their drugs. You know what I mean? Like, instead of focusing on their cannabis use, kind of does that. And then she goes on to say, how they're both unemployed. And I don't know the reasons why they're unemployed. I don't know, and I barely know anything about their story other than what ran here and a little bit, that I've caught through like Facebook and stuff.
Well, if you're taking care of a child that has this kind of illness, I would doubt very much that you would be able to hold down a full-time job.
This is the very definition.
The full-time job.
This is the very definition of why we have a Family Medical Leave Act. So exactly. I was just kind of surprised. I'm like, well, and I asked Noelle, and she didn't look up this particular thing, and I kind of didn't think she would, but just to kind of illustrate my point, how many parents with a child with cancer are working full time? I have like this vision in my head of you dropping your child off at chemo and then going on to work and then picking them up on your way home. And that's not, no, if that's the relationship that you have with your child while they're going something as serious as this, I'd be more worried about the emotional, fallout on the kid than the drugs themselves. You know what I mean?
Mommy, don't you care about me?
Right. And I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm poor and I know what it's like to have to work through thick and thin no matter what. I get that. But when you have a child with cancer, it seems to me that is going to be first and foremost. And they're from Pendleton and currently staying in Gladstone, according to this article, with an RV parked in the drive of a friend's house. So they're like, miles from home. It's not like they're still at home where their job is and everything. But in highlighting the story from this perspective, now we have two unemployed people living off entitlements, giving their kid drugs. That's the story that's told here. And I find that a little bit disturbing because that's not the story that the public needs to hear. The story that the public needs to hear is this program allowed this child access to a medicine that has made her life bearable, manageable, and livable, and helped her deal with this illness. Now, her parents are of, the type, like many among in our community, that believe that cannabis could actually mitigate the cancer itself as well. But even if it doesn't, I mean, that's irrelevant to what it's done for her.
Here's the thing, Jennifer, is that her living in an RV in her friend's house has really nothing to do with it. I would say that because they are from Pendleton, there's not a lot of oncology units there. She's probably not going to have good access to care
that's
there.
why they're on an RV here. They had to come for care. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
That's how they ended up out here.
If cannabis weren't even part of the equation, that may still be their situation.
Exactly. That's my point, is that if you're a parent with a child with cancer, you're probably not working. I mean, I'm just guessing here, but I think if we took a survey, you're probably not working. You're probably on vacation, not. Leave, whatever. You're not working.
Now, I don't have any experience in oncology, but I can tell you that, every cancer requires different treatments. Sometimes they're more aggressive. Sometimes, it's more than 1 day a week. Sometimes it's, a couple of times a month. It just depends on the patient's type of cancer. But, in a child, we tend to be a little bit more aggressive just because it is a child.
Well, and then going back to the whole, dropping her off at chemo to go to daycare or whatever, I also have these visions of like, what daycare do you take this child to? Okay, so even if it's on a day that she's feeling good, I couldn't take my kid to a daycare when he had a cough or a runny nose. You're not going to be able to take your kid to daycare while they're dealing with something as traumatic as chemotherapy. Right. I really expect to see this issue coming back at us in the legislature, though, and I think that it's one that we all need to be more familiar with because these stories clearly are highlighting all the wrong points. And
I think that's kind of the Oregonian in general, is that the Oregonian has typically found ways to create stories that really...
But their stories have been republished all across the media, whatever, as Associated Press. It's this story clipped up in different ways. So it's everywhere. And that becomes our mainstream media message. And so we really need to be prepared to explain this in a way where people understand what's really going on here
and
the
part
importance
of that
of
is
it.
because this is a couple that, you know, and I don't want to make any stereotypical judgments, but I think this is a couple that they like to drag out in front of the media to say, see, dirty, stinky hippies treating their child with cannabis, living in an RV. See, it is bad. See the social repercussions here. This poor child is suffering, when in fact the child is probably getting.
On that
really
note,
good care.
let me just throw out that the father of the child, who apparently doesn't have very much to do with the child, did call social services when he discovered they were using cannabis, and the mother has sole custody, and it's her boyfriend and her that take care of Michaela, and he contacted social services and a few other authorities, and they basically told him they're fine, they're doing what they're allowed to do, nothing we can do about it. And that's also in that article. But I just want to point out that means they have been looked at, they're doing the right thing, there's no question. We do have to take a quick break though, so we're gonna cut to break, and we will be back in a minute to talk about Adderall. You're listening to A Different View.
And now I love to love for
Hi, this is Dan Michaels. If you're looking for professional voice talent for your commercial or podcast, I'm your man. Visit danmichaelsaudio.com for more information.
No phone, no pool, no pets. I ain't got no cigarettes, but 2 hours of push and broom. Lies an 8 by 12 4-bedroom. Man of means by no means, king of the road. Third boxcar midnight train.
And now we're back with A Different View.
You're listening to A Different View. I'm Jennifer, here with Iva.
I'm here.
We've been talking in the recent few weeks about the Drug Free America Foundation, which is my new passion. They're just the funniest group, but they're the main opposition that we really see, not only nationwide but globally. The connections that they have and the lobbying that they do is our opposition. You either hear it reiterated from other channels, but it was sourced by them, or you see them sort of putting their feet into everything. This particular article appears on a blog that they have at their website, and that's dfaf.org. And it's called "The Problem with Using Adderall is a Means to Get a Master's Program." The title caught my eye because it implied that maybe it was okay to use Adderall to get a bachelor's program, but not a master's. Or maybe it was okay to use a different drug for your master's, but you shouldn't use Adderall. Like, I wasn't really sure where they were going with this. It's written by a lady named Valerie Harris. She's an accomplished educational writer who recently penned a distance learning resource that is focused on graduate students. And I did a little bit of background research to see a little bit more about who she is. And basically it's a blog that she writes that's about education, master's degrees, things like that. So she's looking at this from a very educational perspective, and not so much a medical or an addiction or right, or you know what I mean? Like, it's that perspective. But as I'm reading through this blog, there's a quote that comes from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, on their drug review, the University of Southern California Science Review. Sorry, that's what it is. It says, some view the continued unprescribed use of Adderall as not only morally acceptable, but also harmless. Students reduce the serious nature of amphetamines by framing them as harmless, benign, and socially acceptable anti-fatigue aids. As per this argument, Adderall is comparable to coffee or energy drinks. And I was like, okay, So, like, I have a personal problem with energy drinks. Like, I think they're disgusting. Like, the idea behind them offends me. Like, here, drink this so you can go. Like, but I drink coffee, so I can't really down the people that are on the energy drinks. You know what I mean? Because I see the same thing. I get it. It's just not my drug. But the way that this is all framed, that's what I'm hearing. That's not my drug, so you shouldn't take it, because coffee and energy drinks are fine according to the Drug Free America Foundation. and then it goes on to explain to you why Adderall is a problem. It says the drug, which is similar in chemical structure to methamphetamines, is habit forming, particularly when taken regularly over a long span of time. So I guess
give it to our kids.
So I was going to say, so let me just explain a little for those maybe not familiar with Adderall. Adderall is what we give to kids who have a lot of attention and don't sit still and just listen in class. And we call that ADHD, and feed them Adderall. From the time that they're like 6 years old, most doctors are perfectly comfortable giving a child a regular, particularly when taken over a long span of time, regimen of Adderall. Many kids, that I've seen over the years, from 6 or 7 years old on up, take it 2 to 3 times per day in large doses. And the reason that they're given this is because teachers feel that they're unable to pay attention and focus in class, that their energy is unrestrained, like maybe they're bouncing in their seats all the time, or jumping around, or just getting distracted by other things. Now, this is mostly my own personal opinion, but there's, professionals that would argue the same thing. Most of that is based because our kids aren't properly challenged in school, that we've kind of got them all in this same little box, and we say, no, stay in this box. You can't leave this box. This box is interesting. Pay attention. And some kids just aren't interested in what's in the box, or they've already discovered everything in the box and would like to look at other things. But no, this is true for some kids that we are.
I think it's applying one method of teaching to all children and expecting the same results.
Absolutely.
I think that what we don't do in our educational system is try different approaches. Everyone learns differently. We all know about the auditory learner. We know about the visual learner. We know about, what's the other one? Help me out, Jennifer.
Some learn by reading. Some learn by
kinesthetic.
By doing. That's what I was going to say. It's reading, seeing, and doing.
But we only apply one method. Shut up, sit down, and listen. That's the only method that we use for our children to learn.
And then if you don't fit that mold, we give you a drug to make you fit that mold, or at least look like you fit in that mold, so that you're not distracting the other people. But it is pretty sad, but that's what we use it for. But then we're surprised that college students might be using it for better focus and study.
Well, let me tell you something. When you have, when I was going to school, let me just tell you, when you got 12 chapters of this to read and 8 chapters of that to read, 4 papers to write, you are overwhelmed. You're exhausted and you're overwhelmed. And then if you are a master's student or in the healthcare field, you've got other stuff that you have to do. You write your thesis, do your research, do all that stuff. As well as keep up on the curriculum requirements.
Well, and you're only talking about students. You're not talking about the people that are also working, 2 part-time jobs to pay their bills, maybe taking care of kids on the side. I mean, no, that's a component of our society. We put all of this pressure on people and then are surprised that they need help. Again, they're okay with you drinking coffee or an energy drink to get studying all night long. Just don't take the Adderall. And the whole problem is that we're requiring our society to go to these extreme lengths to succeed. And if you don't.
But to a point, though, Jennifer, to a point, I mean, this is a drug that's supposed to be prescribed and monitored, under the decision. The point of this, it isn't, but it should be. But I think it is put out far too often, and I think it's the first thing that we give children instead of offering different options. There's a lot of research on training the brain that is quite successful. Tom Hartman, who's a well-known author on ADD and ADHD, talks about using different methods to retrain the brain. To learn differently, to learn better, to increase attention and productivity. before we get to the poppy stage.
Well,
but
no,
the biggest issue is that a lot of these, they talk about this as being addictive for adults, but there's not even. It seems so laissez-faire to
with
give it
Adderall.
to a child.
With Adderall, the consequences are even just like far beyond addiction, though. Like, according to this article, it says minor side effects include anxiety and transient depression. More serious effects include heart palpitations, elevation of blood pressure, Tourette's syndrome, seizures, stroke, and psychotic episodes or plain old psychosis. And then it goes on to say, a part of the problem is that these occurrences often take a number of years to manifest. In the meantime, students with dependencies are often excelling academically, earning top grades, and landing competitive scholarships and fellowships, meaning that the cost of using this drug is that years in the future you can have all of these negative side effects that weren't happening when you were taking the drug. And again, we're giving this to our kids. It's no wonder that they have problems later. Like, I think that the problem is that the way that we're viewing the use of this drug in the first place is so that the square peg fits in the round hole,
Right.
Maybe we should just create a different hole instead of teaching them that this drug is the solution.
That are overwhelmed. We have teachers that are overwhelmed who can't even, they can't keep up with the students that they have. And if they were all normal, I mean, if they all, I shouldn't say normal, but if they were all, had the same level of attention span or, we're all at the same level of learning, at some point we have to take a look at how we're prescribing this in the first place. It isn't a surprise to me that adults have like, hey, you know what, this stuff's pretty amazing, and I've got this huge load of stuff I've got to accomplish to reach X goal. I'll do this temporarily, and even I have friends that who have their children that are prescribed this drug, and I'll tell you that all of them go, well, only during the school year.
Because in the summer, there's plenty of things for the
kid to do.
Plenty of ways for that child to explore what is causing him to be bouncy and, unable to pay attention. Like I said, usually it is a child that just is not being properly challenged in the classroom. It could be that the material isn't challenging enough, or it could be that it's not challenging in the right ways. That it's not.
Not only that, but I think that we don't. We've cut arts, we've cut music, we've cut anything that's creative out of a lot of programs, even PE, even a lot of those programs have been cut out. Cut recesses and things like that. So kids with high energy don't have the opportunity to burn it off. They don't have an opportunity to use the other parts of their brain so that they have a balance, so that they can work out that and find something that recharges their batteries in a new way.
Well, and just to kind of wrap this back up around, because we're going to be taking a break here in a minute, I love the end of this article, because the end of this article could have been written by an activist for cannabis. It basically says, as long as concentration enhancing drugs are prescribed to a wide swath of the population, their use on college campuses will be difficult to curtail. Better education about these medications' very real long-term effects is needed, though. Some recalibration of pressures and expectations may also be called for. In order for the future minds of this country to be sharp, they need to also be clean. That last line I wouldn't agree with being, but the idea here is that we can't do it through restrictions or, a prohibition, that we have to, be educating, because no matter what we do, it's going to be there. Education is the important component here. We want these kids to be making good choices. And
do we really want our kids to rely on something like this? It goes back to the same thing about, anti-anxiety drugs and things like that. We take away the power from people, to learn how to cope and learn how to deal with these kinds of situations in a healthy way by giving them a drug. We take that away from them.
I think that that's part of it, but I also think that there's a certain amount of, I think that we have to be weighing those risks and benefits ourselves with our doctor. And I don't think that politics and public policy should play a part in a lot of these decisions, and I think that that our policies create a lot of this. I think that there are different ways to solve a lot of these problems without a drug in the classroom, without, you know, having to give somebody an antidepressant. It just, our lives are what is creating this. Maybe we need to be looking at a bigger picture of what's going on here. Why do we have so many people that are depressed? Why do we have so many people that need these attention drugs? You know, there's a bigger issue that we're clearly missing because we're drugging the symptoms away.
Right. We can't prescribe everything away.
So we need to take a quick break. You're listening to A Different View. I'm here with Iva. We'll be right back.
Got nobody safe, and there's nobody cares for me.
NORML stands for Responsible Adult Cannabis Use. If cannabis use is causing problems in your life, consider taking a break or seeking medical assistance. Consider ceasing cannabis use if you have a family history of mental illness. Don't drive or operate heavy machinery while impaired by cannabis use. Cannabis use is not without risks, even though the risks may be far less than those posed by legal drugs.
Some good times, but when I saw you last night, girl, no, I just couldn't define the way you looked in that dress, girl. I saw your mouth in my name, and I just got to confess, girl, I felt that something had changed. I sit on my glass in that line, and I know I said I was doing just fine, but I know what you did.
And now we're back with A Different View.
Welcome back. You're listening to A Different View. I'm Jennifer here with Iva.
Hello.
Hello. So this final segment, we're just going to talk a little bit here about where Oregon's going. This is obviously, you know, heating up as a hot topic among Oregonian activists. Most recently, our community at large has been meeting, you know, around the state, and as many meetings as possible, you know, some more inclusive than others, but as many people as possible are meeting, talking, and trying to forge the way forward. And it's been very inspiring to me to see that there is a lot of coming together in our community right now. We're all agreeing on some of the most major focal points. I think, you know, that there's pretty general agreement that our community at large wants to see safe access for patients. The next thing is that our community wants to see pressure on the legislature at the very least for legalization. Whether or not that will move forward is more up to the legislature themselves, but we're all wanting them to feel that pressure, either directly through, you know, trying to introduce something, or at least indirectly with the knowledge that this is coming. And then finally, there's pushes for various specific legislation, such as adding PTSD to our qualifying conditions here. That's been a long time push that people are getting more excited about seeing happen now.
Well, in Oregon, I'd like to see, if they're going to extend the medical program, I'd like to see them extend it to naturopaths being able to recommend instead of MDs or DOs.
Well, and that actually
like a natural fit.
That actually kind of goes hand in hand with the, you know, the safe access points, because there's a lot of nuances to what's going on. But let me sum up the couple of other things that are going on, and then we can talk about them specifically, because I don't want to overlook the importance of things like decriminalizing larger amounts of marijuana. We've had the 1 ounce decriminalized for years, you know, since 73, I think. And then it jumps up to a felony at 1 ounce. I mean, even if our legislature is unwilling to outright legalize or even expand medical marijuana, they should be willing to look at these discrepancies in how we handle marijuana. We had our district attorneys, pretty much statewide saying marijuana's no big deal. We don't arrest anybody, yet it's a Class A felony if I grow a plant. It's a felony, I think a B felony if I have more than an ounce. It's, these are serious crimes that we attribute to it. If we all agree that it's no big deal, can we at least make it a misdemeanor? I mean, is that so hard for the legislature to do? So these are things that we're, even if we can't get that full forward push, there's things that could be happening right now. And there's a lot of nuances, especially with the legal side of things. Like I said, the decriminalization, different little things that need to be done that are very likely to see happen if, we give a little push behind them. So now going back to the medical marijuana, though, that's the difficult part, is that we all want safe access. Mm-hmm. But getting there is the challenge, because our community has a variety of different needs. And then when you look at like law enforcement or the legislature or various other stakeholders, I guess you would say, in this change of the law, they have different views. Like law enforcement isn't concerned with, patient A having access to marijuana. They're concerned with making sure that grower A is not selling that marijuana. So they don't care about the access. They don't care how easy it is, how likely it is. They care about the oversight that they get to partake in whatever, that's their whole focal point. So we need to be really developing what is important across our community. And right now we're kind of struggling on some of that, because it's important that we have access. But there's also other things that Oregon has that we don't want to lose, like the right to grow our own medicine, like to have somebody else grow for you, the right not to have, cops knocking on your door coming to do a compliance check because you're required by law to let them. We don't want these sorts of things as a part of our program. And I was speaking with Noelle Crombie, as I was mentioning earlier, about the Michaela story, and we kind of crossed over into this upcoming legislative session. And in talking to her, she kind of highlighted, I think, what a lot of our community doesn't get, because to her, most of these changes proposed made perfect sense. And when she asked me about them, the way that she asked illustrated that she didn't understand. You know what I mean? Like she's like, well, what don't you guys, think it's okay for these, gardens to be inspected? And we're like, well, yes, large gardens, commercially scaled, licensed gardens that can, properly pay taxes. And yeah, we're okay with that being inspected. But then I mentioned to her that the problem that we have is that law enforcement's the one that wants to do those inspections. And even she was sort of shocked like that. She's like, does that make sense? Like, why would they do it? And I explained to her, well, there's this image in law enforcement's perspective that grower A and B are going to rent this big commercial space, and they're going to get licensed and give their address and all of their private information to the state, and they're going to grow a bunch of marijuana, and they're like a bunch of illegal gang members that are then going to, I don't know, whatever, like jump them with guns if they come to inspect. So it's got to be cops because they want to be protected. and just the logic that gets from this person got licensed with the state to grow marijuana, gave their ID, did a background check, did all of these things, to cops are in danger, or inspectors would be in danger, is like just this big faulty jump. Like if you were really in danger, none of that other stuff would have happened. So, I mean, cops can go check out illegal grows still, but we could have a civilian oversight group do, and I told her, I'm like, I don't think there's really any preference in our community. It could be the Department of Health, it could be the Department of Ag. It could be whoever, the Liquor Control Board. I don't think we really care who it is, so long as it's a civilian oversight, not legal, criminal
not law
oversight.
Enforcement. And then, law enforcement can be pulled in when there is egregious acts or something like that. But I think, we're talking about a plan. I can't help but think that the Board of Agriculture should be involved.
Well, and I would agree with that. But I mean, if it wasn't the Department of Agriculture, if they decided it was the Department of Health, okay. Yeah. They don't have guns and armor and riot shields, and you know what I mean? Like, okay, that's good. Right. They come with a little piece of paper and they let you know what you did wrong. You pay a fine, you correct it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Right. And that's the other thing that I think that we really kind of focus on in our community, is that if we're not doing it right, tell us what's wrong so that we can do it right. Like we're given this sort of vague set of standards, and if you stepped outside of these standards, then you're a felon criminal going to jail, having everything seized from you. There is no correction that ever takes place. You know what I mean? Like, for instance, okay, if we're not allowed to have dispensaries right now, what is the appropriate way to get medicine from patient A to patient B and reimburse those expenses? Well, nobody in Oregon, as far as legislature, law enforcement, has wanted to answer that question. They think that if they just arrest everybody that does it, there will be no exchange, even though there is a legal exchange allowed for. But we're supposed to stumble around it until we land on it accidentally. And then we won't be, there's no middle ground where you're given this, okay, everything's in compliance here, except that this weighs too much. So, either you have to hang it this other way or do this, like something that would tell us, well, what could we do to make this situation work? And they don't want it to work. That's why they don't do that.
Well, no, I mean, I think that they fear that, I want to believe they fear crime's going to run rampant, but I don't think that's it. I think it has more to do with their jobs. I think with protecting their budgets and protecting their jobs.
I think that there's a lot of reasons that lead into it, but that's definitely part of it. And I think part of it is that their funding is dependent upon this, not just for their jobs, but how they buy their toys, how they get their different tasers or their guns or their cameras or these different things that might be very valuable law enforcement resources that they don't get any other way. Maybe these things actually do help them deal with some of the more concerning criminal elements in our society, because they have this tool that they used for drugs. Now they can use it over here. And I think that their fear is that they lose that funding, that ability to advance, their criminal investigative ability. Now, on the other hand, I'd really wish they'd spend more time on these more serious crimes.
Yeah, other serious crimes, yeah.
But I think that going back to the legislature and where Oregon's going, the one thing that I'm really impressed to see is so much agreement about the pressure on the legislature. Like the Oregonian editorial board came out a couple of weeks ago, right after the election, saying, "Hey, legislature, you better do it before the stoners do it first, because you're going to have to deal with it anyway. So why don't you guys put out something good?" And I've kind of laughed at that because it looks down on us, but it's true. It's what we need to do.
True. Well, and it's, and the thing is that it's not just the stoners that voted for Oregon and Colorado. I think it's the basic, it's the.
You mean Washington and Colorado?
Yeah, that's what I meant. And I think that the sway of the nation is going our way. I think more and more people that are mainstream are going, I don't smoke cannabis. I mean, this kept happening to me over and over on Halloween. I don't smoke cannabis, but I think what we have now is BS, and we need more regulation because people are going to smoke it anyway. Mm-hmm. And I just want to make sure that there's something in there that protects me and my children.
Well, and the reality is that whatever we put forward is going to be the most liberal that we can get. I mean, point blank, it's going to be the most liberal that the community and the funding thinks they can get, because that's our goal. We're trying to liberalize these laws.
Now the legislature.
Well, no, I'm saying that at large. I mean, in Washington, maybe they believed that 1 ounce possession and the DUID was required, that was the most liberal that they could win with. And that's what, what I'm saying? So that's what I'm saying, is that the end result is going to be the most liberal that we can achieve. But if the legislature takes the initiative, and this isn't a pro argument for us other than it's the push that gets them to do it. So, I mean, I want to be clear on that. But if the legislature takes the initiative, you're going to be looking at the most conservative that fulfills those needs. Do you see what I'm saying?
Right.
So the legislature has incentive to address this. Ultimately, no matter what they put forward, it's going to be more conservative than what we put forward. They have incentive to do this. And if they don't, we will.
Well, and the thing is that I think it's just flipping time. It's ridiculous that we're still having this conversation 70 some years after, Prohibition started, and people are getting it, that it doesn't make sense, and it's not making things safer. It's not meaning Prohibition doesn't mean that people aren't going to use it. It just means that we have more problems than we know how to deal with.
Yeah. And I did want to just comment on this article really quick before we wrap up. We've only got about a minute left. But in regards to where Oregon's going, there's a HuffPost article, and Russ responded to it a little bit. But I just wanted to throw out one thing. My only comment on this is that these 10 things led to the legalized marijuana in Colorado. But Oregon's now working with 2 states that have legalized around it. We are in a completely different paradigm. And it's great, that he's sharing what worked for him, but it's a whole new world. Well, different strategies.
Let me say one thing before we
About
go.
30 seconds.
All right. The one thing I want to say before we go is that I think that it's time to stop fighting for medical and start fighting for straight out legalization.
Absolutely.
I think that if anything, people have realized that medical doesn't go quite far enough, and it is time for legalization, and we really should just forget all about medical and go straight for legalization.
Absolutely. You're listening to A Different View every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Pacific Time. We're at Twitter at ADV420 and on Facebook at A Different View 420. See you next week.
See you next week.
It's a long, long, long road. It's a long, long